I think it would
doesn't have one anymore.
Kind of narrow the available population down a little bit.
Significantly. It's just me now. I'm the only person who sees that as an advantage. Oh, well, I am honoured. Do as you will. But also, they said, of course, these FBI whistleblowers, that the FBI had a significant number of agents, that there were other law enforcement agencies there on January the 6th. In fact, it was the whistleblowing on this subject that caused them all this grief. That in a sense, that there are some discrepancies, shall we say, on how that event was initially reported on with regards to what actually went down. Now, what you've been accused of in the mainstream after you received, I think it was like 40,000 hours of footage from your man McCarthy there, was that you sort of cherry-picked, is the phrase that often comes up, footage to deliberately show that it was, to a degree, a peaceful event. What is your sincere opinion of what went on January the 6th? And why do you feel that there is yet an attempt to regard it as a deliberate insurrection? And also within that, I guess the possibility for presenting moments of peace within 40,000 hours of footage does exist. So were you sincere in your presentation, or do you have a particular perspective on how you wanted that event to be seen?
I have, well, let me just say, one of my children was there working in the building and called me during it, and was right nearby when Ashley Babbitt was shot. So I was interested in it from the moment it happened. I was appalled by the vandalism outside, by fighting with police officers. I hate violence, from abortion to the war in Ukraine. I mean, I am consistent on that. I'm not a Catholic, but I share those. I definitely share those views. I'm not for the death penalty. I'm not for killing people. I'm not for hurting people. I'm not for violence. And I've had those views for a long time. So, any violence on January 6th, I oppose. I've said that many times. I was kind of happy to leave it where it was, which is this got completely out of hand. The only reason I ever got involved in commenting on it was, we did a show that night saying, well, this is awful, right? What happened? Was the lying about it was immediate. This was a racist, white supremacist insurrection. Well, okay. There was no indication to this day that race had anything to do with it at all. Like nothing. These are people who thought the election was stolen from them. There's some evidence they were right. We could debate that, but that's what they thought. That's a meaningful thing. If you've got a big population in your country that doesn't believe that your elections are on the level, you need to figure out a way to convince them that the elections are on the level, or else you can't have democracy, because it's a faith-based system. So that was the first thing I noticed. There was no effort at all to convince people, actually, electronic voting machines are secure, which they are not. By the way, that's a lie. In any country that has electronic voting machines is by definition at risk of having its elections stolen. By definition. No country that cared about democracy would have electronic voting machines, okay? First thing. But no one even, and by the way, many Democrats have made that point. Not now, but 10 years ago. There was no effort to reassure anybody. They immediately used it as a cudgel to make their political opponents shut up, and in a lot of cases to send them to jail. So I noticed this, and I'm like, well, wait a second. Nobody here is operating in good faith at all. They're just immediately lying with maximum aggression. And anyone who asks questions about it, like me, and if you could go back and look at the tape, my first 5 shows on January 6th were like, well, yeah, it's bad, but I don't think you're telling the truth about what actually happened. Shut up! Racist! What? So that's always the key for me. If it's like an infection, you know it's infected when it hurts. You press it. You recoil. They immediately recoiled when you asked any questions about January 6th. And that was a tip-off to me. I had no thought in my head as I watched this happen on television and in the subsequent weeks that U.S. law enforcement or military agencies had anything to do with it. That never crossed my mind. I never thought that it was a false flag or anything like that. I'm not a conspiracist by temperament. I never thought that. And then I interviewed the chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, in an interview that was never aired on Fox, by the way. I was fired before it could air. I'm going to interview him again. But Stephen Sund was the totally non-political, worked for Nancy Pelosi. This was not some right-wing activist. He was the chief of the Capitol Police on January 6th. And he said, oh, yeah. That crowd was filled with federal agents. What? Yes. Well, he would know, of course, because he was in charge of security at the site. So the more time has passed, now it's been 2.5 years, it becomes really obvious that core claims they made about January 6th were lies. And my view about events and about people is if you catch someone telling a lie about one thing, the first question you have is, what else are you lying about? If you say to your wife, where were you? I was at the grocery store. If you find out she was not at the grocery store, then it raises, okay, probably not just lying about being at the grocery store, were you? Like, what is this exactly? Why were you lying about that? And that's kind of the way I feel about January. Like, what is this? What this is? They're clearly lying. That's provable. Why? And, you know, I'm the last person. I'm often accused of being a conspiracy nut. I'm the opposite. I grew up in a very stable country, the United States, in the 70s and 80s, where people didn't indulge in conspiracies because there weren't any obvious ones afoot, right? I mean, we took things at face value. We trusted our government by and large. But the amount of lying around January 6th, and it was obvious in the tapes that I showed, is really distressing. And anyone who's covering for those lies should be ashamed of himself. And that would include almost the entire American media, including Fox News. People at Fox News. Fox News, to its great credit, let me air that, and I'm grateful that they did. But there are people there who were mad at me for airing that. Really, why? If you think I'm cherry picking it and taking it out of context, show me where. And by the way, I didn't make the claim that it was entirely peaceful. It wasn't. Police officers were injured. More police officers were injured at the riots in front of the White House the year before, but whatever. All injuries to police officers or anyone else are bad. I'm certainly not making excuses for it. But I'm asking obvious questions. You said this happened. For example, there was a guy called the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley. They put the guy in prison for years. There is surveillance tape that they hid until I aired it, showing the Capitol Police trying lots of doors, trying to get into the Senate chamber, the sacrosanct chamber that he wasn't allowed to be in, and then escorting him in. And he kind of wanders around like he's taking a hit of mescaline, just kind of, you know what I mean? And like he says a prayer, he thanks God for the Capitol Police, and then he wanders out. Now, there are a lot of conclusions you could draw from that, but you cannot call that guy an insurrectionist. That's a lie. And by the way, an insurrection is a very specific meaning, and I'm pedantic about words because they're the currency that I trade in. I mean, that's what I do. I use words for a living, so I care about their specific meanings. That was not an insurrection. It was not armed, and its purpose was not to overthrow the government. It was a spasm of rage that Trump definitely helped inspire. That's true. And at the election results. Okay, you know, I'm not actually for that. I don't think leaders should be making people more pissed in general. But that's what it was. It was not an insurrection. And to put Jacob Chansley, an American citizen, a Navy veteran, in jail for years after he was let into the Senate chamber by uniformed Capitol Hill police officers, and then I play that and I'm the bad guy? Fuck you. Like, what do you make of that? I'm sorry, it makes me mad just thinking about it. I said I wasn't going to be a hater. That makes me mad. And I see people on other channels, it's outrageous. He's trying to minimize January 6th. Well, but what? This guy went to prison. You ever been to prison?
Only for visits.
Right, okay.
It's not very nice.
You don't want to go to prison. To take a man's freedom away and call him all these names for something he didn't do and then show no remorse at all when you are exposed to have lied about it. There's a human being who was locked away in a prison. It's an outrage to me.
Tucker, like, would you mind if I spoke? Sorry. Worked very hard to get in this position. Right? See that Iraq war, like, you know, that was brilliant when you went on that podcast and went like that you're ashamed that you participated and that you rallied for that war. Now to hear you talk about Jan 6, you're saying like that sort of at the beginning you had no axe to grind, and broadly speaking you oppose violence of any kind, and oppose violence. Yeah, I know, I believe you. And you oppose violence against the police, perhaps in particular. Now though, it seems that you are inquiring, if not suggesting, that there was another aim. Are you saying that it was allowed the Capitol Police to be funded differently and more extensively? Are you saying that it facilitated further authoritarianism, that it enabled people to smear the MAGA movement, that it created more opportunity for surveillance laws and censorship? One of the sort of techniques or critiques that we use here on our channel when looking at news is, oh, does this allow people to censor more? Does this allow people to surveil more? Does this allow, for example, like a sort of, just to use a sort of something anecdotal and contemporaneous, that there's a Just Stop Oil movement in this country at the moment, and whenever you see footage of them sort of blocking roads and sort of road users dragging them out the road because it's annoying. I say this as a person who sort of loves nature, loves the environment, feels that profit shouldn't be put ahead of respect and love for the environment. I can't help but feel that the media has an agenda in continually presenting us with these annoying images of Just Stop Oil getting in the way of ordinary commuters who are just trying to get to work. And I'm beginning to now critique media from that perspective. Oh, they are using this event in order to elicit these emotions, whether it's war or the events of January 6th. Do you believe that there is, as George Carlin would say, a convergence of interest between the state and its desire to regulate, and corporations and their desire to profit, big tech and their desire to capture data, the state and their need to get data? What is it you're observing? Because when I'm listening to you, you don't sound like a regular TV anchor anymore. And in fact, one of the things I'm offering is that that's not a role that's going to exist for much longer, because the centralization of authority is becoming so rapid and so radical that if you even work in this space, with these new EU laws being passed that will mean that social media platforms will be heavily fined 6% of their annual revenue and that they can be censored. The Five Eyes countries all passing censorship laws. In a sense, to become an independent media voice will be to become an activist. So with regard to the January 6th, do you think these events are used to create particular outcomes? Do you think it's just opportunistic? And where do you feel your personal role is as an independent media broadcaster is now?
Well, I think my role is to tell the truth to the extent I can see it, to say what I think is true, always with the knowledge that we see everything, through a glass darkly. We don't see things clearly. We don't have perspective on ourselves, the world around us. We get a lot wrong. I've gotten a lot wrong, that's for sure. But you do your best, and you cannot allow people to force you to lie, period. So that's how I see my role. I think you're asking the right question. And I asked the same thing about the climate movement. I mean, I'm bewildered by it. Apart from my own family, there's nothing more important to me than nature. I think I spend an above average time in nature, amount of time. I mean, I've organized my whole life to be in nature. So I really, really care about it. And I'm very upset about the many ways in which it's despoiled, at least in my country. I mean, nature's not doing well. The environmental movement is gone where I live. And we pollute. We put up chain stores and strip malls and pave things we should not pave. We are very tough on nature in the United States. And the environmental movement does nothing to stop that. And so my question for the climate people, and I have no doubt the climate is changing. It's always changed. I live in a place that was completely sculpted by the glaciers, which only melted 10,000 years ago. There were people living where I live in northwestern Maine when the glaciers receded, the Native Americans, 10,000 years ago. So this is a feature of life on Earth. And so I have no doubt it's changing again. And I would be completely open to the possibility that people's behavior is accelerating that change or driving it to some extent. It doesn't sound crazy to me. I don't think it's proven, but I'm open to it. Of course I am. My question is really simple. Which of your solutions to climate change disempower you? So when you act, you're a father, on behalf of your children, you are doing things because you love them. They're not necessarily in your interest. Like, you'd rather go take a sauna or do some yoga or hop on your wife. But no, you have a child with needs, so you love that child, so you do something for that child. That's what it looks like to serve and love someone, is to do something you don't want to do, that doesn't help you in any way, but at least potentially helps that other person. I see the climate movement not doing one thing that doesn't enrich or empower the climate movement and its corporate sponsors. Not one. So, for example, not to be boorish here in lecture, but I'll stop with this. Like, if I understand, the ecology correctly, trees are helpful if you're worried about rising CO2, correct? Because they consume it and then emit what? Oxygen. So if you're really worried about climate change caused by carbon dioxide, you'd probably be planting a lot of trees. I don't see a ton of, and I would be very for that as someone who truly loves trees and spends a lot of time thinking about trees and have a lot of trees and maintain a lot of trees. I love trees almost more than anything. So where's the nationwide effort to reforest the United States? I don't see it. Instead, I see a lot of solar panels from China that don't work, that actually wreck the environment, industrial wind farms that wreck where I live. I live near them. I know what they do. They kill all these birds of prey. They're destroying the environment, but they're becoming richer. So on January 6th, tell me one solution that doesn't make you more powerful.
Yeah.
There's not one. So that's an indication of bad faith to me. And of course, I'm not going to be boorish and I'll stop, but anyone who's interested in the uses to which January 6th has been put by the people in charge in Washington can look it up. I mean, the surveillance that was justified, the total capture of our banks, for example, by the FBI in the wake of January 6th is completely shocking to any civil libertarian. You can't call my bank and find out what I spent money on. You don't have a warrant. What? That's not allowed under our Constitution, but they did it because it was an insurrection. Okay. So, I don't know. I can't even guess as the mechanics of January 6th. Did the many federal agents in the crowd do this? Did they go along with it? I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to speculate. But I know in the aftermath of January 6th, that event was used by predators in our political sphere to increase their power and to disempower the population they supposedly serve. And I'm very offended by that. Not because I'm some crazed populist. I'm not. I don't want to burn anything down. I'm like very temperamentally conservative. I like to build things, not break them. But you can't look at me with a straight face and tell me you're defending democracy when you get JP Morgan to go through my credit card statements. You're lying. That's my only point. You're lying.
Yes, it's a good point. So
you're spinning me up, man.
I suppose that both the pandemic era and the current war can have that critique equally well applied. Who benefits from this ability to surveil and impose, for example, vaccine passports? Who benefits from our inability to openly communicate on these subjects? It always appears that there is a sort of an invisible hand guiding these events, guiding the conversation, amplifying certain voices, diminishing others, and it always appears to somehow benefit centralist, authoritarian institutions, be they governmental, corporate, or financial.
Anti-human, and war does it especially. And if you'll pardon me, and I don't mean this as criticism of your country, which I love, but I've spent the last week in England, and I've driven all around.
It's nice, isn't it?
Well, it's beyond belief how pretty it is.